So hello everyone. We're here to tell stories that inspire innovation, entrepreneurship, and diversity. Today's discussion is on how we can hack the brain and increase our lifespans through compassion and mind training. I'm Victoria Saucier, the founder of Bloopost, an online platform making alternative healthcare easily accessible and affordable through smarter technology. I'm talking today to Jim Doty, who is a clinical professor of neurosurgery and founder and director of the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education at Stanford University. He collaborates with scientists from a number of disciplines examining the neural basis for compassion and altruism. In addition, he is an inventor, he is an entrepreneur, and he is a philanthropist. He supports a number of charitable organizations focused on peace and healthcare throughout the world. He also spent 9 years on active duty in U.S. Army Medical Corps, and he is an author for New York bestseller Into the Magic Shop, a neurosurgeon's quest to discover the mysteries of the brain and the secrets of the heart. My goodness, it's such a quite a background you have, Jim. Thank you very much for getting on the call. Jim, you're transforming healthcare with compassion. Are you doing what you thought you will be doing when you were growing up?
No, but in many ways it clearly relates to experiences growing up. Many people, the reality is that what they do as an adult is very much influenced from earlier life experiences or their childhood. For me, I grew up in poverty with a father who was an alcoholic and a mother who had a stroke, and she was partially paralyzed and actually ultimately chronically depressed, attempted suicide. Neither of my parents had gone to college, and we were on public assistance essentially my entire life. And certainly as a child, that type of a background is very challenging in terms of achieving and ultimately at least what society often calls success.
Interesting. So tell me, in your book you wrote, and tell me how walking in that magic shop, referencing to your book, actually changed your life.
Well, at that time as a 12-year-old, I already was filled with a sense of despair and hopelessness, and I was becoming a delinquent, actually. I saw no future. I had no mentors. I certainly had no money. And those aspects allow individuals to achieve or have opportunity to achieve. If you don't have mentors, if you don't have a stable family life, if you don't have access, if you don't have money, the likelihood you will achieve is essentially zero, and completely zero if you're a minority. But fortunately, what happened to me at the age of 12 was I walked into a magic shop. And the extraordinary thing about that was that the owner wasn't there, but his mother was there. And I describe her as this individual with this radiant smile and this embracing smile. And I was a scared kid. And she knew absolutely nothing about the magic shop, at least the tricks in the window. But what she did know about was people. And after a very brief period of conversation, she said to me, I really like you. I'm here for another 6 weeks, and if you show up every day, I'll teach you something that could change your life. And in fact, I did show up. And over that period of 6 weeks, she taught me a practice or a technique that fundamentally rewired my brain and changed the trajectory of my life. And what she taught me was that many of us, and especially in my position, with this very unstable, dysfunctional background, lived in a state of chronic anxiety and fear. And that has a huge negative effect on your body. And it causes muscle tension. It causes the inability to focus. You're constantly distracted. You're scared. And so the first thing she taught me was to recognize this reality, and then techniques on how to relax my body and attend or be present. The next thing she taught me once I had mastered that was an understanding of how each of us has a dialogue that is ongoing in our head. Many of us believe that dialogue actually is us. And that dialogue is often not one of self-affirmation or kindness, but one of hypercriticality, one of actually meanness to yourself.
Criticism, like
And
self-deprivation.
this is very common. Self-criticism. No, that's exactly right. And what happens is people have a tendency to say, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, et cetera, et cetera. And what she made me understand was that that is not reality. It is a generated dialogue that has nothing to do with reality. But that reality, not only does it affect you negatively in terms of your health, it imprisons you. It imprisons you from reaching your full potential as a human being. Because if you say, I can't do something, by definition, you cannot. And what she taught me was how to leave that self-created prison and have freedom. And that manifested by learning how to change that self-dialogue, the negative self-dialogue, to one of positivity, self-affirmation, and kindness. And once I was able to do that, she taught me to appreciate that everyone is suffering in a different way, and that events that happen to me neither are good or bad. Good and bad are words that we place on events. Interactions with people are good and bad placed on judgments, often which are wrong. And finally, what she taught me was an understanding that you can change your brain through intention and through repetition. And so fascinatingly, this woman, who I actually don't know specifically what her background was at the time, but she took what has been learned through thousands of years of Eastern traditions, as well as what we know today as techniques to create plasticity in your brain, or to change your brain, or to change the wiring in your brain. And she already had a sense of these in 1968 when I met her. And fundamentally, that interaction with this woman changed the trajectory of my life. No longer did I blame people, as an example, my parents, for not giving me enough attention or being there for me because they had their own struggles. I didn't judge them anymore. And in fact, I stopped judging events. Events were events. And so when I changed how I interacted with the world changed how it interacted with me. Because if you present yourself with anger and hostility and tenseness and fear, people react to that. When you present as a calm, thoughtful, caring individual, people react to that. And every success in my life has fundamentally been because of that interaction with that woman and the techniques that she taught me. It allowed me to go to medical school. It allowed me to become a neurosurgeon, a professor at Stanford University. It allowed me to become a successful entrepreneur of a company that went public for $1.3 billion. It allowed me to become a philanthropist, setting up health clinics around the world, endowing professorships, funding research. But more importantly, what it allowed me to do was to reflect back on my own trajectory and create a program at Stanford University where we actually examine, if you will, the value proposition of being compassionate with intention and being altruistic.
So what is compassion? What is the science behind it? I mean, this is your favorite subject, probably.
Sure. So as scientists, we use definitions, and the definition we use for compassion is a motivation, or a recognition of one's suffering, or another's suffering, I should say, and a motivational desire to alleviate that suffering. It doesn't mean you are able to, you want to. And what happens is, and this relates to our evolution as a species, is that because our offspring, to have something called theory of mind, to have the ability to abstract think, to have complex language, those abilities that separate us from other mammals have an absolute requirement that our offspring are cared for about a decade and a half after birth, like other species that swim away or run away into the forest. As a result, our offspring mirror our behavior over a very extensive period of time. But why would a mother or a parent care for a child who requires so many resources and so much effort? And the reason is that when you care for another, your offspring, actually your physiology has evolved to function at its best.
So you blossom in, moms sort of like blossom in when they're
Oh,
caring for the
absolutely.
child.
So when you show caring and love for another, and remember, as a species, we're finely attuned to recognize the suffering of another through microfacial expressions, through body habitus, even through smell. And when you demonstrate love or caring or concern or alleviate one's suffering, amazing things happen. You shift from a threat response or the engagement of your sympathetic nervous system to actually your parasympathetic nervous system. When your parasympathetic nervous system is engaged, your executive control area works at its best. You're more discerning, you're more thoughtful, you're more creative in regard to solutions. Additionally, your heart rate function is improved. You go from having a decrease in what we call heart rate variability, which is associated with sudden cardiac death, to an increase in heart rate variability, which is associated with being compassionate and also with an increase in parasympathetic nervous system input. Additionally, your blood pressure decreases, your heart rate decreases, your genes express proteins that are not negative to your system. As an example, when you are under stress, your genes produce proteins that cause inflammation.
Right.
And disease states are associated with inflammation. When you are compassionate, when you're caring for another, though the expression of those genes is decreased. Additionally, your immune system is boosted. So you can see this whole area of benefit from these types of practices. And as you probably know, when you are stressed or anxious or feel threatened, you also release hormones such as epinephrine, norepinephrine, and cortisol, which on the savanna in Africa several 100,000 years ago allowed for your survival if a lion was chasing you, but in modern society are not of benefit to you in many circumstances. And many people live just by the nature of modern society with a activated sympathetic nervous system and the chronic release of these hormones at a low level. And again, it impairs creativity, and when your sympathetic nervous system is impaired, it decreases executive control functions, such as discerning thoughts and decisions, and it has a negative effect on your physiology. So when you practice these techniques, when you actually practice compassion with intention, it has this huge health benefit. Additionally, you may have heard of a hormone called oxytocin.
Oxytocin, yeah.
And it's called the love hormone or the cuddle hormone or the nurturing hormone. And what happens is when that hormone is released, again, the same shift occurs. It puts you in this calm state of openness, receptivity, caring. But also what happens is those areas in your brain that are associated with pleasure and reward are also activated.
Interesting.
So when you care for another, you actually benefit yourself.
So it's increasing almost serotonin state of happiness to some extent.
Yes,
how can people express compassion to themselves, coming back to depriving themselves, self-bashing themselves versus being compassionate, self-loving? Is it the same?
They are different, but a lot of people are fearful or unable to be kind to themselves. And in fact, there's a whole sub area of compassion research that centers around self-compassion. And Kristen Neff, N-E-F-F, is a scientist who has pioneered this work. And she has developed techniques that allow you to be more compassionate to yourself. Because again, not only is it helpful to you and healthful to you, but it also is helpful to you in terms of your ability to be compassionate to other people. Because when you are suffering,
Right.
it's hard to look at another person and be open and caring. It's, as an example, people say, and there can be no peace in the world until there's peace within yourself. And this is very much like that.
Oh, absolutely. It's there is an expression: if you don't love yourself, it's very difficult to know how to love others. And with compassion, it's essentially the same. How would you encourage people to develop compassion and altruism? Is there any particular technique? And what say if someone wants to change something in their life?
Well, first of all, nothing of value is free, and in the sense that it doesn't require effort. There are a variety of techniques that we have developed at Stanford, and if someone is interested, they can go to our website, which you may post associated with this, but is ccare, ccare.stanford.edu, where we share many of these techniques and principles and have courses. But it doesn't happen overnight. The first thing is, of course, as we talked about earlier, one is you have to learn to relax. You have to learn to attend. You have to understand that your threat response has been activated. You have to understand about this dialogue and be able to separate how you react to this negative dialogue in the sense of it affects your physiology in a negative way. So the two practices associated with mindfulness technique is relaxing the body and, if you will, taming the mind in the sense that you no longer have an emotional response to negative dialogue. But beyond that, this idea which we were just talking about of self-compassion, being kind to yourself, being loving to yourself, then opening your heart to another. And it can be very difficult. What I tell people is that to sit and close your eyes and breathe slowly in and out, but think of that person in your life who has accepted you unconditionally, has given you love, who knows everything about you, good and bad, and still loves you. And just sit with that for a minute or two and breathe slowly in and out so you know what that feeling is like. And then the more you do that, the more you will be able then to stop throughout your day and sit with that feeling of unconditional love. When you sit with that unconditional love, it is fundamentally impossible for you to be angry, for you to be stressed, and even for you to criticize others, because it is so calming to you. And then the next thing is to think about those in your life, initially those you care for, maybe people who you, first of all, it's easiest with your family, of course, then to go to maybe friends, and then to go to maybe colleagues who you maybe are neutral about, and think about being able to give them that same embracing, understanding that they're frail, fragile human beings, but that they are in fact worth love, just like you are. And then the next challenge, and where the real work comes in, is to be able to give that same wish of happiness, of contentment, of love to, frankly, people you're not particularly happy with, or people you dislike, or have very different opinions about the world than you do. And as you will find, though, as you do this type of work, not only does it get easier, but you yourself become more happy, because people, as I said earlier, have the ability to look at you and understand your emotional state. And
they read your energy. They feel
exactly.
you. They feel you.
Yes. And as I told you earlier, the reason I have been successful, the reason why I was able to change my own situation as a child, was because I no longer carried that negativity, that reactivity, that anger, that hostility towards other people. And as a result, I looked at every person, at least I tried to as much as possible, simply as another human being who is struggling and having their own issues, and that we're in this together. And if I can be of benefit to them, I will try to do so, and hopefully they will do the same for me. And at least for me, it has been very effective in the context of my own success.
I want to ask you, on your book, Into the Magic Shop, what was the most surprising thing for you while you were writing it? Because a lot of people discover themselves while writing books. What was the most surprising stuff for you?
Well, you're
If
right. I mean, first of all, everybody has an incredible story. They really do. If you talk and take the time to talk to any human being, they have had ups, they have had downs, they've had tragedies, they've had struggles, and they have had events demonstrating immense amounts of love, at least most. And everyone's life could be an incredible story. The challenge, of course, is how do you write a book? And that is a challenge because there has to be some sort of an arc of a story that reaches a height and then a conclusion. But I won't go into the techniques of writing books per se. But to answer your question specifically, when you're going through the process of writing a book, and if you're honest with yourself, there are areas that are very painful to bring up. You've been hurt, and also you demonstrate aspects of yourself that, frankly, aren't so great. But the thing that really surprised me reflecting on is that I actually did deserve love at all points in my life, and we all do. And there's nothing wrong with wanting that or trying to achieve that, because, and this is interesting, the Dalai Lama says it's being compassionate is one of the only times it's okay to be selfish, because when you care for others, when you're compassionate, when you're of service, you actually benefit greatly. And that's really the greatest lesson, is that at every aspect in my life, when I did not give, when I was selfish, when I wanted more for myself, I was at my most unhappy.
mm,
When I
yeah.
gave, when I embraced, it made me feel my best. And we have science that proves that when you care, when you give, when you love, that's when your physiology works its best. And in fact, caring for others increases your longevity. There was a study that was done on volunteers. It's called the Wisconsin Longitudinal Study, and it followed a group of people over the age of 65 who volunteered a certain number of hours per week. And volunteerism is in some ways directly related to compassion. You are doing a service to another person who is suffering and in need. And it showed after a number of years that those individuals who in fact were of service in this matched controlled study had almost a 2x increase in predicted longevity than the people who did not.
2x. That's huge.
Yeah, it's huge. It's huge.
That's huge.
And
Wow.
in fact, we know these types of actions have as much or more benefit than exercise or being at your ideal body weight.
Wow, that's shocking, I would say.
So it's amazing, because if you think about this, if individuals exercise in moderation, if they eat in moderation, if they practice compassion, the fact of the matter is you would not have a pharmaceutical industrial complex, because 80% of illnesses would be gone.
Would it, it makes sense. Yes, I agree. But American society does a lot of volunteer work. Would that be a form of compassion?
Of course, but philanthropy is not necessarily. Do you understand the difference?
Yeah. So what is the difference?
Many people in America, they are philanthropic, not because necessarily they're being compassionate, because they want to appear as if they're nice, and they want a tax write-off.
Yeah.
And in fact, if we go back to the study I was just talking to you about, there were two exceptions to the rule as far as benefit from volunteerism. One was if you were doing it to achieve reward, or if you wanted to impress people.
Essentially, it doesn't get on your subconscious level emotional state of mind. It doesn't do
No,
anything.
because you're not frankly being compassionate.
Yeah,
You
you're
have no,
superficial actions.
if you were to look at many philanthropists, if there was not either a recognition to themselves and or a tax write-off, they would not do it.
If you were to drop everything right now and write another book, what would that be about?
So if you've actually looked at the endorsements from my book, you will see endorsements from the Dalai Lama, Thich Nhat Hanh, Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, Amma, Matthieu Ricard, and a variety of, if you will, spiritual leaders, gurus. And it's interesting, right? Because I'm an atheist. As we were talking about a bit earlier before the show started, the only thing I know with absolute certainty is that we're in this moment. Everything else, I don't know. And people ask me, how is it possible that a person who is an atheist, who has no belief system, is able to have developed these deep relationships with spiritual leaders throughout the world? And what I tell people is that when you interact with evolved spiritual leaders, they can gauge your authenticity in a microsecond. And it has nothing to do with memorizing dogma. It has to do with having an open heart and being able to love.
Mm-hmm.
And over the last number of years, and in fact, as an example, I was just with Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, who you may know has started something called The Art of Living. He's been doing it for 35 years. He has tens of millions of followers. I literally was with him right before this interview. A week and a half ago, I was with Amma, the hugging guru, and spent time with her. Right before that, I was with another Indian guru who's developed the Heartfulness Institute and spoke to his devotees. And then the week before that, I was with Radhanath Swami, who is the leader of the Krishna movement, who has a very large ashram in Mumbai. And the reason I tell you this isn't to impress you, but to tell you that these relationships with these individuals are extraordinary in the sense that you can be with people who know how to love unconditionally. And that's why they have followers. Because all of the people who follow them are frail, fragile human beings just like you and I who are looking for love. And when an individual is able to embrace someone with unconditional love, it has a huge, huge effect on them in terms of they're feeling good about themselves, them feeling good about the world, and believing in their own capacity to help change the world. Mm-hmm. And so the next book I'm working on is actually going to be called Out of the Magic Shop. In the first book, I talked about some parts, in addition to my own life story or memoir, some neurosurgical cases that have taught me lessons or have demonstrated certain things to me. In this book, I will continue with that somewhat, but also discuss my trajectory since the book finished. And for those who may be listening, I've also had the joy of being in conversation with those individuals, actually on the stage, in something I call Conversations on Compassion. So in addition to the research we do at Stanford, there's something that I actually selfishly do, which is to invite individuals who inspire me, who I've learned from, to sit on stage with me for an hour and a half and just talk about their own lives, the events that led them to where they are today. And those individuals have included people I mentioned to you just now, as well as Thich Nhat Hanh, Eckhart Tolle.
Every spiritual teacher, all the wellness people, because I dived in that so deeply in the last a year and a half. And that's the main mantra, is that living in the present is that there's no past, there is no future. What I have encountered that a lot of people live in the past, or they project in the future, they live for the future, and they have absolutely no present life or joy of present life. And it's not that easy. It's really challenging to embrace that, live in the present, in the sense what you probably mean. And any advice you can give to people how to center yourself and live in the present?
No.
Figured it out. Figured it out.
Buy the book. Buy the book.
Yeah. Well, Beach is a good advice. It's an excellent book. So everyone who is listening should read the book. Definitely.
But it is a challenge, and in fact, studies have been shown that about 75 or 80% of the time, people are either thinking what could have been, might have been, should have been, or thinking about something that has yet happened of which they have no control. And both of those, for many people, create uncertainty or anxiety. And when you have uncertainty and anxiety, of course, it stimulates your sympathetic nervous system, even at a low level, and results in the release of a variety of peptides or neurotransmitters that have a deleterious effect on your health. And this is sort of, unfortunately, the nature of our humanity in some ways. The other problem, though, is when you're not present, you can't be present. And what I mean by that is that for you to have true relationships, true connection with people, you have to be present. You cannot be constantly distracted because, of course, people interpret that. Have you ever been at an event and you walked up to somebody and they're looking over your shoulder at the next most important person they want to see and not you?
Usually it doesn't happen with me, but anyway.
It happens to me all the time because I'm not.
No, but I know what you mean. It's truly, when people talk just for the niceness or pleasant conversation without true interest in who is involved in a conversation. Yeah.
We know that if you don't have connection, which translates often into loneliness, it has a very, very huge deleterious effect on one's health. I'll give you a couple examples here. Have you heard of something called the blue zones? So what the blue zones are, and there's a lot of literature written about this, are those areas in the world where people routinely live longer than a century. And one of the common characteristics of those blue zones are people who live typically in multi-generational families. They have grown up in the area. There is a consistency about their environment. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes they live their whole lives. And the advantage of that is that, unlike in modern society, where you don't know the people you interact with, you have no relationship with them, there's no trust, what happens is you project a vision of yourself that you want people to see. You want them to see that you're smart, that you have your act together, that you're not suffering, and therefore you're hiding yourself.
Right. And internally, a completely different world.
Exactly. In those blue zones, you've grown up there. People have seen you as a child running around naked, covered in poop. They've seen you do actions which, frankly, are not particularly nice. And they've seen you be your best self. And guess what? In every one of those instances, they love you.
So it's sort of like being more open, like a book.
Yes, and not being afraid and being your authentic self and sharing that you're suffering. And this is what you learn from these blue zones, is that when you show your true self, when you can demonstrate that you're in pain. As an example, when I give talks oftentimes, I become tearful and emotional. And it's okay. People, I've never had an experience by doing that where people go, boy, you're sure a jerk, Jim. It doesn't happen. And this is what people want. They want to be accepted for who they are. They want to be unconditionally loved and embraced. And when you allow that to happen, it has a huge positive effect on your physiology. And that is your default place where you should be. And when you act that way, your health improves. And that's why these people live longer than a century, because they have true, authentic connection, and they care. They care about the other. And this is the best lesson, because you can create that for yourself. When you, as an example, in the context of even the business world, I'm sure you've heard of Google, and Google did a project called the Aristotle Project. And as you may know, for its first decade or so, they only hired the top 5% of the top 15 schools in the country, or something like that. And basically their belief was that those types of people are the best at everything, and because they're the smartest and they got the best test scores, and that will create leadership teams and create the best outcome. And during the period of time, though, they also acquired many companies, which were comprised of people who did not fit those criteria. And of course, Google is a wonderful data analytic company, so they followed them for years and spent several millions of dollars to really determine what it is about a successful team or a successful leader. And guess what correlation it had with being in the top 5% of the top 15 schools?
Probably on the bottom. Yeah, yeah.
It had no correlation whatsoever. And in fact, domain experience did not have that much effect. It was caring, kindness, authenticity.
Maybe in the era when we all become drones and robots, that would be less relevant. But as long as we have human society, human interaction is very important, and by far more important than just knowledge in something, understanding human behavior and driving that to some leadership.
You know, the holy grail, of course, is changing human behavior, whether it's dieting, whether it's exercise, whether it's even these practices, because many people have developed habits or patterns of behavior that, while beneficial in some circumstances, in many others are not beneficial, in fact detrimental. Yet changing those patterns are extraordinarily difficult. What is happening, and when you mention drones or artificial intelligence or machine learning, though, is that we are developing technology that can change people's actions. The problem is, though, the holders of that technology are private or are companies, okay? And like many capitalistic corporations, they are not necessarily motivated to do what's best for you or me or society. They're motivated to make the most money and get the most money for their shareholders. And as we have seen in a variety of domains where capitalistic corporations are given free will without any type of regulation, they do not self-regulate. They regulate to maximally benefit, even to the point of killing people or being very detrimental to the environment or society. And we are actually at a crossroads, because imagine a scenario where we have computers read your body temperature and even your heart rate just from a camera, as well as your emotional state quite accurately. Then you can take the data that Google has in terms of your search choices, combine that with the GPS information from a telephone company, and combine that with your GPS route, and combine that with your Facebook contacts, and then create a scenario to motivate you to buy things. Decisions that we make have nothing to do with us making a conscious decision. This is going to create greater and greater inequality, okay? Because there will be the haves and the have-nots, even in more stark contrast in terms of have already with income inequality. And there will be a decision made that unless you fulfill certain criteria that is a benefit to these large corporate or conglomerates, that you are not worthy. And their resources, access will be taken from you. And then that will create, of course, this dystopic vision of the Mad Max, where the cost to the world and society is going to be potentially negative. And when you start believing that there are individuals who are not worthy of being cared for, being loved, of being supported, then you come back to what we've already been through in a variety of historical circumstances, but most readily that comes to mind is Adolf Hitler. But you will see this translate into another scenario even worse than that.
That's a gruesome picture.
Well, that can be overcome, and it will be overcome with love.
Let me ask you a question. If you were to sit down yourself like 20 years back, maybe 30 years back, what advice would you give yourself? Would you change anything?
Care more, want less. But as long as you were not starving, and as long as everyone was in a similar position, because this is where problems occur. When you have the haves and the have-nots, and the haves believe, or the have-nots believe that they should have what the have-not or the haves have, then start unbridled capitalism and consumerism. And this is part of the problem, is that consumerism, conspicuous consumption, are artificially manufactured methods that capitalists have used to separate you from happiness. This is the false advertising of the narrative of the West. You do not need those things. Now, obviously, it's nice to work hard and be rewarded on some level, but to either create a situation where you want to have more than anyone else, or you cheat the system, because frankly, you cannot gain as much as many individuals in our society have gained without creating a system which benefits them. In disadvantage to a variety of other people. And I don't want to go off into people claiming I'm a socialist. The fact of the matter is, over the last 30 years, basically there has been a theft of income, or the wages of many working people, into the pockets of the rich. You've had a 682% increase in CEO pay over the last 30 years, and you've had a system that has systematically taken for all the wrong reasons. So if we actually had enlightened individuals who actually, and again, I have no problem living well or driving a nice car, but you don't need 1 million cars. You don't need 20 houses. You don't need islands all over the world. You don't need 5 jets. Those are things that are outrageous. And that the sums of money you're talking about to change the lives of many, many people in the world are, I mean, remember, 50% of people live on $2.50 a day. People on Wall Street were equivalent to all the salary paid to teachers in the United States. I don't want to go on and off into this because this is not what we're here to talk about. But these are important issues. But I actually have to run.
Well, thank you very much.